Now I think it's time to start. Bismillah. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our meeting with learning partners. Today it's a very, very special meeting. As all of you know, we are hosting a dear author. We are hosting Mr. Rehan Khan, who is a well-known author. He has started the publishing and the writing a long time back. And one of his brilliant book that touches our daily life. It comes as a warning for all of us. It is named Distracting Ourselves to Death, How to Find Purpose in a Bewildering Digital World. This book is, whenever I go through it, I found it's not only a book. It has a wealth of knowledge, it has exercises, it has case studies, it has examples, it has researches, it has a lot of things. So today, I will leave the floor to, it is not like also official interview. It is something because Mr. Rehan is an author. He's British gentleman. He was out of the countries when we met first few, I think last, in December, I think, when we were like planning in a conference about sales management, hosted by the Academy for Sales Excellence. And he was and he is so kind of he gifted this book to me, and he said, okay, well, Subhi, when I'll come back, I promise I will have a meeting with your friends and we're gonna talk about my book. So today, without further ado, I will leave the floor to you, Mr. Rehan Khan, and we'll start with like a session by Mr. Rehan Khan, and then we have question and answer. As we agreed in our usual meetings, we have like some rituals we follow. Our questions, our discussions will not, will be away from anything political, anything religious, and anything about sex. We talk only about knowledge, about what's good for us in our daily life. Thank you so much. Over to you, Mr. Rehan.
Okay, Assalamu alaikum, good evening, Bismillah. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak to you. Let me do a quick introduction, first of all, about myself. And then what I can do is then I can go into the presentation for about 30 minutes, 35 minutes, and then we'll have plenty of opportunity to ask questions and so on. So just by way of introduction, so I've worked primarily for large global corporates for about 30 years or so. And recently, I set up a business called Improve Executive Focus. So Improve Executive Focus, because what I was finding is that a lot of the executives that I was dealing with were quite distracted. So this was a way of saying, okay, well, let's see, how can we get your attention back? How can we get your focus back? How can we improve productivity, improve well-being, and things like that? So that's kind of one thing I do, and I'll talk to you about that in a second with regard to some of the research. The second hat I wear is I'm a professor at Hult International Business School. So I teach a module called AI and the Future of Work, because everyone is interested in artificial intelligence, right? So I teach that to MBA students, and so AI and the Future of Work. And then the kind of the third hat I wear is that I write novels as well. So I have about 6 novels. The novels are historic fiction. They tend to be adventure stories, but they're adventure stories set in the past, but they also have an element of akhlaq, an element of tarbiyah within them, because especially for young people who are 15, 16, 17 plus, sometimes the things that they're reading or the things they're consuming it's in the cinema and stuff, perhaps it's not very good for their soul, right? So in essence, the books have some element of akhlaq within them, but ultimately they're adventure stories. And my publisher is in the UK, so my books are mainly published and sold to the UK and the US market as well. Okay, so let me get started. I'm going to share my screen, so if that's okay, and I'll get cracking. And if there's any questions, I would appreciate if people could just write them down and hold them off till we get into the Q&A session. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk to you about this topic around focus, around minimizing distraction. But before I kind of, as I talk to you about it, I certainly want to present the story about why we distracted in the first place, and then we can talk about what can we do about it as well. So if you ask most people today, how are they doing? They'll say, "Oh, I'm really, really busy." And generally, people's business has something to do with their smartphone. So people are quite often busy with their smartphone. They're walking around, they're on their smartphone. They're sitting having coffee with someone, they're on their smartphone. They're waiting in a queue, they're on their smartphone. And quite often, what happens is that when people should be doing a piece of work where they need to focus, they're actually on their smartphone at the same time. So they're doing two things at the same time. So, in other words, they're multitasking or they're trying to multitask. But according to Earl Miller, who's a professor of neuroscience at MIT, he says that our brains are not wired to multitask. When people think they're multitasking, they're actually just switching from one task to another task. So they're not multitasking, they're not doing two things at once. They're actually just switching from one task to another task. And every single time they switch, there's a cognitive cost. So what's the cognitive cost? So as you switch, so when you should be focusing on something, maybe the focus task is you have to prepare a financial model, maybe you're writing a strategy paper, maybe you're about to do a performance review with an employee, but you're doing some kind of focus task, or maybe you're spending time with the family, whatever it might be. And then if you jump around when you should be focusing, then the cognitive cost is that in the brain starts to overproduce cortisol. Now, cortisol is, of course, the neurochemical that when you're stressed, your brain starts to produce cortisol. And also the brain then starts to produce adrenaline. So adrenaline is obviously the fight or flight neurochemical, right? So basically when we're multitasking, when we're jumping from one thing to another thing, one thing to another thing, then the brain is overproducing cortisol and it's overproducing adrenaline. And all the oxygenated glucose that you have in your brain, you start to burn through that. Okay. Which is why if you ask people, yeah, you're busy, but how's it going? Or I feel exhausted at the end of the day. I'm really tired. Yeah, of course you're tired because you've burnt through all the nutrients in your brain by jumping from one thing to another thing. Now, what also happens is that as we, jump from one thing to another thing, then the prefrontal cortex, so this is the part of the brain that we need to help us stay focused, right? So when you need to stay focused, the prefrontal cortex, it comes into play. But it also has it's very susceptible. It's also the prefrontal cortex also gets easily distracted. So when there's something like new or something novel, maybe you have a new notification on your phone or something pops up, then unfortunately the prefrontal cortex gets distracted very easily. And when it gets distracted, there's another neurochemical that goes off in the brain, which is dopamine. And I'm sure many of you would have heard of dopamine. And dopamine is like the pleasure chemical. So you feel kind of good. You feel, oh, great. Because you feel like it's like a kind of a rush from one thing to another thing, one thing to another thing. So this pleasure chemical is being released. So what's happening is that multitasking, jumping from one thing to another thing, we feel good because we have the pleasure chemical going off, but actually we accomplish much less. Now there are many, many studies done on this topic. I'm just going to point to one study done at Stanford by Ophir, Nass, and Wagner. And what they did, they tested the hypothesis to see, okay, were people who were multitaskers, heavy multitaskers, were they more effective, okay, at getting work done? So first of all, they tested the hypothesis, were multitaskers better at ignoring irrelevant information? Is this why maybe they're more effective? And what they found was actually no, multitaskers weren't better at ignoring information. They were actually really, really bad. They tested then a second hypothesis, which was were multitaskers better at storing and organizing information? And or did they have better memories? Okay. And so they tested that hypothesis as well. And what they found was that actually multitaskers weren't better at storing and organizing information, and they didn't have better memory. So that was again, not correct. So they tested a third hypothesis to see, well, okay, are multitaskers actually better at switching between tasks, going from one thing to another thing? And what they found was actually, no, they weren't. And the people who actually liked multitaskers were actually much more effective than people who were heavy multitaskers. And the problem was that the people who were heavy multitaskers, so they should be doing one focused task, but they keep jumping between tasks. The problem was they couldn't focus on what they should be doing, and they kept thinking about, oh, I need to do the following next. And because their attention got divided by, oh, I need to go and do X now, they didn't concentrate on the task at hand. Now, of course, when we're talking about multitasking here, we're talking about activities that require your focus, right? As I say, maybe you're preparing a paper for the board, at work, and you need to really focus. Maybe you're doing some research, you really need to focus. I'm not talking about things like, for example, you might be, we might be in the kitchen and we've got the stove running and we're just doing some washing up. You can multitask there, no problem, because that's habitual, right? It's like when you're in the car and you're driving somewhere that you're familiar with and you're listening to a podcast, no problem. That's a habitual activity. That's fine. But if you were driving somewhere and it was a new place and you were reading Google Maps and you were reading the road signs on the road, then your recall from the podcast would be very, very low. It would be, you wouldn't be able to do it because you can't do two focus tasks at the same time effectively. You're going to do one thing at one time. We're very good at unitasking, one thing at one time when it's a focus activity. Okay, so there was one study done by Professor Gloria Mark, who is a professor of information science, and she did a study with the employees of NASA, Boeing, Microsoft, Intel, and I think there's one other organization. And with the permission of about 4 to 5,000 employees, what they did was that they put a logging program in the computer of these employees. And what the logging program did, it logged, so it tracked how often employees would jump between tasks. Now, in extreme cases, uh, people were jumping every 40 seconds. They're working on one thing, they jump to something else. They're working on one thing, they jump to something else. And on average, it was about 3 to 4 minutes. Now, remember, what did Professor Earl Miller say? He said that when you when you multitask and you jump from one thing to another thing, there's a cognitive cost. We're overproducing cortisol, we're overproducing adrenaline, which is then really bad for our biology. It's not good, right? So we're actually making life more difficult for ourselves. Now, the other thing that happens is that when you do what the research showed is that when you are concentrating on something, so say for example, I'm working on an investment case, and I'm in the Excel model, and I'm building my financial model, and then I'm sitting in an open plan office, and then someone comes and disturbs me and says, "Hey, Rehan," and they start talking about their weekend or something. It would then take me about 25 minutes to get back to the same level of cognitive depth I was at before I got disturbed, right? So if I'm really deep in something, and then someone disturbs me, or even maybe I disturb myself. I pick my smartphone up and I start browsing on this. That can happen as well, right? It takes about 25 minutes to get back to the same level of concentration, same level of depth that you were at before you got distracted. Now, if you add that up, if you get distracted, say 7, 8 times in a day, that's like 2 hours, right? That's 2 to 3 hours. So no wonder people are struggling to get their work done. And I often hear when I go to companies, people say, the only time I can get any work done is when everyone's gone home, right? Then it's quiet. Yeah, but that's not right. That's not normal. That should not be the case, right? Because then you're affecting your well-being, you're affecting your family life. There are many like knock-on effects, right? So why should we be doing that? And what the research also showed was that people went back and actually did 2.26 other tasks before they went back to the original task. So they didn't go back often. They got distracted by something else. They went off, did a couple of other things, and then they came back as well, right? So again, we're making life unnecessarily difficult for ourselves, and we're working unnecessarily longer hours to try and compensate. Now, of course, there's a lot in the a lot of documentaries. There's a lot of material about why our attention is being hacked. Now, I'm not gonna. I've always worked in the technology sector, so please don't misunderstand me. I'm not here to, put the technology companies down in any way. I'm not doing that. But what I am doing, I'm just saying that there's a lot of people who've worked in the technology environment who've come out and said, well, this technology is very, very addictive. And there's a interesting documentary on Netflix called The Social Dilemma, where Tristan Harris, who's a former Google employee, he talks about it. You can see the quote there from Sean Parker, who's former founding president of Facebook. And he said that the thought process was that how can we consume as much of your time and conscious attention as possible? And that means we need to give you a little dopamine hit every once in a while because someone liked or someone commented on a photo or post or whatever. So you've got people in the tech industry who know that the technology, the way it's been designed to really, keep giving us that dopamine hit, keeping us distracted perhaps from what we should be doing. Okay. And again, don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to criticize the technology companies here. I'm just saying this is the business model. The business model is how can we hack your attention? How can we keep you on our platform so that the advertising revenue can run? That's just the reality of it, right? So I think it's down to us then to understand that and then say, okay, do I want to be part of that system? Or maybe, I actually want to get a life and I want to do something else. So I mentioned dopamine a few times, right? Now, dopamine is a neurochemical which was discovered by some neuroscientists, Olds and Milner, at McGill University in Canada in the 1950s. And what they did was that they wired up these rats and they put an electrical signal into the limbic part of the brain of these rats. And when they fired that electrical signal into the limbic part of the brain, they actually found that the rats found a lot of pleasure from it. The rats really enjoyed it. So they then put, as you can see from the photo, they then put a lever in the cage of the rats. And the rats could essentially push the lever. And every time they pushed the lever, they would get an electrical current into the limbic part of the brain. Now, these rats enjoyed it so much, right? They just kept pushing that lever the whole day. They kept pushing it and pushing it and pushing it. And the rats forgot to drink, they forgot to eat, they forgot to exercise. And soon enough, what happened? The rats keeled over and they all died of exhaustion. They literally died of exhaustion. Now, and that's when they realized they discovered dopamine and it was a pleasure chemical. Now, you're probably thinking, well, okay, Rehan, I mean, come on, they're rats, we're human beings, we wouldn't do that, right? Well, there's an interesting study by Dr. Natasha Dow-Scholl, and she wrote a book called Addiction by Design. And she spent quite a long time with people in Las Vegas in casinos. Now, obviously, I'm not recommending you go to a casino, but she spent a lot of time with gamblers, hardcore gamblers in casinos. Now, in a casino, the most profitable product line in a casino is actually the slot machine, where you put your money in, you pull the lever. Nowadays, they don't have a lever, but it's more just touchscreen. So that's actually the most profitable product line in a casino. And that's why in the casino, there are hundreds, if not thousands of these slot machines. So what she found was that the players who were there, who were really playing the game, they were so focused, there was so much in their game that that anything could be happening around them, they just wouldn't notice. And some of the more like older players would actually just wear like adult pants. They wouldn't actually go to the toilet. They would just do what they needed to do whilst they were sitting there because they were just so in the game. Right now, these games are extremely addictive. Now, the issue is that the same design principles that go into slot machines, exactly the same design principles go into like smartphone games like Angry Birds or Candy Crush or some of these running type games that you have, whatever they're called. I can't remember them, but whatever they're called. So some of these running games like Maze Runner or something like that they're called. So the same design principles are going into those games as well. right? So again, this is something we should be mindful of because the way the technology is designed today, it's not designed to help us concentrate and focus in a corporate setting. It's not designed to help us be present with our families, right? It's very much designed for a select group of investors who are making a lot of money from the business model, right? So again, it's up to us. Do we want to accept that, or do we want to be aware that this is what's going on? Okay. So that's a little bit about dopamine. And now, one of the big distractions for a lot of us at work is email, right? So there was one study done by Professor Glenn Wilson at King's College in London, and he found that when people were at work and they were on their screens, and they had that little email notification, like in the corner or at the top, and it flashes whenever you have an email. Or these days it might be like a instant message and it starts to like flash, right? What happens is that your effective IQ drops by 10 points. So whatever you're working on, say I'm working on a HR, report or something. Now my attention is divided because I can see that email notification is flashing. Oh, you have email, you have email. My attention now becomes divided. So my effective IQ drops by 10 points, right? Now, what Professor Wilson says, he says, just to put that in context, when people smoke marijuana, and of course, I'm not recommending you smoke marijuana, but what Professor Wilson says is that when people smoke marijuana as a drug, their effective IQ drops by 6 points. So again, think about that, right? We are making our life harder for ourselves if when we're trying to focus on something, we have all these notifications going off around us. We're lowering our effective IQ and we're making life more difficult for ourselves, right? What's also happening is that when we're trying to learn something and our attention is divided, then that information that we're learning goes to the wrong part of the brain. There was one study done by Professor Poldrack at MIT. And what he showed was that when school children were doing their homework and they were watching television, then the information from the homework got coded into a part of the brain called the striatum. Now, the striatum is a part of the brain that we use to help us learn a new skill, or say, for example, or a new procedure. Say, for example, I learn how to juggle, right? So learning how to juggle a couple of balls, that gets coded into the striatum. But when the children were doing the homework and they weren't watching television, so just doing the homework, then the information from the homework got coded into the hippocampus. That part of the brain, lit up in the scans. So the hippocampus, it gets stored there. Now in the hippocampus, the information is stored, it's organized, and most importantly, it's easier to retrieve. So when you're just unitasking, the children were just doing the homework, it went into the hippocampus, it gets categorized properly, and it's easier to retrieve. And again, think about that. If you're doing some learning at work or some knowledge development and your attention is divided, it's going into the wrong part of the brain. So how are you going to remember it afterwards, right? So again, why are we making life difficult for ourselves, right? We don't need to do that, right? We can have better habits and just do one thing at a time. So Timothy Wilson, who's a professor at University of Virginia, he says that the brain receives around 11 million bits of sensory information per second, but we can only concentrate on 40. So we've got all this sensory information coming in, but consciously we can only focus on about 40. So what the mind is constantly doing, the brain is constantly making choices, right? What shall I let into my attention? What shall I exclude from my attention? So Sean Aker, who wrote a book called The Happiness Advantage, he said that one way to help us to focus on the right things is to make a distinction, make a difference between something which is we should pay attention to, okay, which is like a positive signal, and then something which is noise that we should just ignore. And what he says is that what is noise? Noise is something maybe that's unusable. So the example he gives, he says, if for example you hear about maybe there's been like a terrible train crash, in a country on the other side of the world, right? Now, unless you are from that place, unless you plan to help those people, if you spend all your time, you know, looking at that news item the whole day, really it's unusable. Like, why? Why are you doing that? You're not planning to help those people. You're not from there, so it's unusable, right? So that's kind of that's noise. He says noise is also something which is untimely. So maybe I'm going on holiday somewhere, like in 6 months' time, and I'm checking the currency exchange rates from today, right? I don't need to do that. It's untimely. Then there are things which are hypothetical. So it's like if you live in Europe where the weather changes a lot, like where I grew up in the UK, then the a 5 day weather forecast only has a 53% chance of being correct the fifth day, right? So it's hypothetical. So again, you can't be certain about that. And then he says things that are noise are distracting, right? Things that are just distracting. So again, it's for us to focus on the things that are positive signals rather than focusing on the noise. Now, one good technique to do this is something that's called what psychologists call meta awareness. And meta awareness is thinking about what am I thinking about, right? So meta awareness is thinking about what am I thinking about? Because it's very easy for us to get distracted, right? So we pick up our phones, we start doing something else. So then just stop yourself and think, actually, should I be doing that, right? Should I really be doing that or not? Or should I be focusing? Now, of course, certainly in our tradition, when we're praying, when we're doing the salah, we should be trying to focus on that. In other traditions, when they're meditating, they should be trying to focus on the meditation, right? So this is becoming aware of, what am I thinking about? So for example, if I'm doing a performance review with my employee, am I present? Am I really giving my employee my full attention, my full time? Or am I thinking about, oh, I've got to play a tennis match this afternoon and I need to get ready for my tennis match? So how, aware am I of where my attention is? So this is again a technique that we can use. It takes practice, obviously, but the more you do it, the stronger your attention becomes. Okay. Now, just talking about goal interference a little bit here. Now, it's often when the new year comes, whether it's the Islamic New Year or it's whether the Gregorian New Year in January, then people often set goals, right? They had set New Year's resolutions. I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to go to the gym, or I'm going to, read a book a week or something. Now, setting goals is psychologists say this is mediated. This is essentially undertaken by what psychologists call executive functions. So our executive functions are our abilities as human beings to evaluate something, to make a decision, and to organize. Now, as human beings, we're very good at this. We're very good at executive functions within the brain. This is a very mature function that we already have. We can evaluate, we can decide, and we can organize. But what we're not very good at is achieving our goals. And often when you speak to people who've set New Year's resolution and you say, okay, how's it going? Maybe they gave up on quite a few things that they were planning to do because achieving goals is it's determined by what psychologists call our cognitive control functions. Now, cognitive control functions are things like our attention, right? How attentive am I? What or is my attention fragmented? How attentive am I? What is my working memory like? Can I actually remember things, or do I just say, "Oh, I'll Google it," right? How strong is my memory? How good am I at goal management or what you call self-efficacy? So this is my ability to organize myself to get things done. Or do I just say, oh, this is too hard, I don't want to try it, and I go off and do something else, right? So these things are cognitive control functions. Now, the stronger our attention is, the better our memory is, and the better our ability to actually manage our goals, the higher chance there is that we're going to achieve our goals, right? So this is within human beings, cognitive control functions are not that developed. we have to develop them, right? But if we're constantly being distracted, by ourselves or by other people, then we're not developing these functions. And if we're not developing these functions, we'll struggle to achieve our goals. Okay. So if you look at it, what's actually kind of happening is that we've become information foragers. Now, a forager, just to maybe explain that word. So foraging is the best example would be if you see like an animal, like a squirrel, for instance, in a forest. A squirrel in a forest is foraging. So what it's doing is looking for food. Yeah. So the squirrel runs around and it finds an acorn and it, eats it, and maybe it hides it somewhere, and maybe it buries it, right? So animals, they forage for food, but when they've had enough, they just stop. So the animals know when to stop, right? So the squirrel will take a certain number of acorns and nuts, it stops. Even if you watch these um, natural history documentaries, and you see that the lion is chasing the zebra, and there's this flock of zebras, and the lion catches one and eats it. The other zebra are literally standing like 5, 10 meters away because they know that the lion is not going to eat them because he's now got his food, right? That's it. He's content. He's got his food. He's not going to eat the other zebras. But as human beings, unfortunately, we don't seem to know when to stop. We're constantly foraging for information, right? So that's why, we're constantly scrolling on our phones. Oh, what next? Oh, that's interesting. Oh, what next? Let me go to that. So essentially, we've lost the ability to control ourselves, right? Um, and we're constantly foraging for information, another little tidbit of information, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Why do we need to know? You just don't need to know so many things that are just not important to you, right? So again, focus on what you need to know. Focus on the necessary. You don't need to focus on other things. Okay, so that's information foraging. Now, the one of the things here is looking at the impact on the future of work, right? So if you look at a report from the World Economic Forum in terms of the top skills that are required for the future, they talk about things like analytical thinking, they talk about creative thinking, they talk about resilience, flexibility, curiosity, lifelong learning. Now, I would suggest that a lot of these skills you can only develop them when you bring when you're not distracted, when you can develop your attention and you can develop your working memory. And that's when you can really, focus on these things. And so what you can do is what Professor Cal Newport of Georgetown University in the US, he talks about deep work. So deep work is when you do real, really like deep, thoughtful, cognitive work where you really push yourself, you really improve your skills, and you develop things which are hard to replicate. Well, I guess a good example would be in this part of the world, there was a tradition of pearl diving. Now, if you look at the pearl divers, what would they do? The pearl divers would put a nose clip on, hold their breath, and then they would dive deep. And they knew that only when they went really deep would they find the pearls, right? They wouldn't find the pearls at the top of the ocean. They'd find them at the bottom. The mind is the same thing. Within your mind, there are jewels, but you have to dive deep in your cognition. You have to go really deep to find those jewels. The jewels are there. We all have them, but you have to dive deep. If you just do shallow work, if you just stay at the periphery, you're not going to be innovative. You're not going to find breakthrough ideas. You're not going to be creative. You'll literally just be doing shallow work, which is, forwarding emails and answering IMs. Now, of course, if someone is sitting in a call center, fine, that's okay. But for most knowledge workers who need to actually develop knowledge, that's actually a real problem because with AI and machine learning coming in, it will do a lot of that shallow work. So as workers, as employees, have we developed deep thinking? Are we going to be employable in the future, or are we going to be, unemployed in the future, right? Okay, it's going to start to. I've got a couple more slides, and I'm going to stop. Now, what I think also is happening is that all this distraction is creating an impact on leaders as well. So I think there are kind of three domains of leadership. The first domain is the information domain. So all leaders and executives, what do they have to do? They have to communicate, right, to their organization. These are our targets. This is our strategy. They control information, what goes out, and that's fine. And leaders have always done that, and they do it today, and they do it very well. You then have a second domain of leadership, which is people management. Now, people management is then, it's about leading people. It's about identifying talented people. It's about nurturing and coaching people, right? It's about connecting to people outside your business unit and outside the organization. Okay. So that's kind of, an aspect of management, which is people management. Now, I think what's happening is because managers and their executives and leaders are so busy with being bombarded with information, I think they're not doing much people management. When I look at organizations and I speak to employees, they don't feel like they're being coached. They don't feel like they're being nurtured and developed so much, right? Because the managers are so busy in the information domain. They're so busy just communicating and sending out information. And what managers are also not doing is they're not doing action. So this is like the manager, rolls their sleeves up and actually gets involved in the work. Now it might be that, okay, someone gets involved and does a investment case. Maybe it sometimes might mean someone gets involved and does something, on the factory floor or something, right? So employees like to see their boss, their manager, actually sometimes do the work. Now, so what's happening? Managers now are so busy on the information domain, they're not actually doing the work. So they're becoming more and more distant from where work is actually done as well, because they're so overwhelmed with with their attention being broken up. So I think a lot of these things, what's happening is that there's an impact on employee engagement. So just very briefly here, you can see the data from one of the Gallup studies there, and there's a lot of other data as well. People are most employees aren't really engaged at work. They're actually actively disengaged. If you look at the well-being data, again, there's a big impact on well-being. A lot of people are looking to change their jobs because they don't feel like they have really good well-being. So what I kind of guess, this is the last slide I want to show you. So I guess my kind of hypothesis on this is to say, well, look, if you can improve focus, okay, then I think you can actually improve employee engagement. If you can improve focus, then what you can do, you can also improve employee well-being as well. Why? Because when people become aware, so the first step is you need to become aware, why am I being distracted? So what I showed you today is a little bit about that. It's about, why am I being distracted? Neuroscience behind distraction. That's really positive because now you can do something about it. So then the second step is, okay, let's put in place the right habits. What are the right habits that you need to put in place for yourself, for your team, for your department? The third step then is how can you prioritize? Because most people struggle to prioritize. If everything is urgent, that means nothing is urgent, right? So how can you prioritize? How can you focus on the necessary, the meaningful, the essential, and ignore everything else? And then the last step is about purpose. How can you become the person that you are destined to be, right? How can you become the person that you are destined to be? So what is your purpose at work? What's your purpose in your family life? What's your purpose on other activities? So I think that improving focus for me is about these kind of four steps. And if you can do that, then of course you can improve engagement, you can improve well-being as well. And so what I do as part of my company is I actually have like a program for organizations that takes them through these kind of four steps. So I'll stop there, Dr. Sobi. I'll stop there at that point, and I'll unshare my screen now, and then we can open it up and for a conversation, for comments, for questions that you have as well, if that's okay. So great. There we go. So yes, please, anyone feel free to contribute.
Thank you so much, Dr. Rehan, for this wonderful presentation and taking us into this wonderful journey. And please, I open the floor. Anybody would like to speak, just go ahead. I think Mr. Osama has something to ask. I see your
Well,
hand.
no. Well, actually, I enjoyed the talk because there's lots of Dr. Han opened our eyes to lots of technical and, like I can say, biological issues that are out of the scene when you are just going through life. And it's very interesting to listen to some of the examples, especially this the rats or mice fun electrical thing that distracts those creatures to death. That's really, really, really strong, and it's very deep. And people do go to this near death. Sometimes they die because of they stop working, they lose families. This is more than death to some extent for humans. And they have a big purpose in life to do, and they just get far away from that, and they don't know why. A lot of people, to be honest, don't know. It just opened my eyes to things that a lot of people complain about not achieving anything, if you ask them what you do during the day, I'm running here and there and doing my best. But you sit down and watch them. We even in gatherings, everybody's scrolling through the screen. That's the biggest disaster of the modern world, actually. And I can't claim to be like innocent and feel those. I am also part of that system. But all in all, mashallah, it's a very nice topic and study. And I'm not a good reader. I don't have much time for reading big books, but I think I'm going to put some time for this one because it's needed for us, and also to guide our own family and loved ones also, because it's really important. And it's getting worse by the minute. I mean, the social media and the offerings are expanding in a speed light, and it's something you cannot catch up with. And that was all my comment on this one. And it was very nice. Thank you very much for your time and for the nice.
Thank you so much, Mr. Osama. And I think Dr. Khamis has been raising his hand from the beginning. Sorry, I didn't notice it. Dr. Khamis.
Really, it's inspiring presentation. Thank you, Dr. Rehan, as highlighted by Brother Osama, that you already put us inside. You open our eyes to, especially you see how the attention is working and how you can balance yourself, and become aware of yourself on this, what you're thinking, and how this dopamine working, and I think it is, and how the media world is driving you in this attention. Of course, it's their work, but it impact us now. From, as we highlighted earlier, from the digitization and how we are moving toward this digital world. This is our, well, it's a lot of advantage on that, but at the same time, lots of challenges. And I can see that, especially in our smaller world, we highlighted, the family and the school is, how you can, overcome this challenge, and at least the family, the school side, or even in the smaller, if you have like a housemaid or a worker. I mean, there is for example, for myself, I have some, like a farm, and I have some worker which earlier they don't have this, this WhatsApp and all of this. But when I provide them, now Wi-Fi and all of this, it's advantage for me, because they can video me, I can see what's happening there and so on. At the same time, I see them, they get extracted, of if I'm not there, and I can see, the work performance activity not as much. So I love your model on the bigger business side, where you have but how you can apply this in a smaller, how can you reflect this in a smaller, on a family, or on in a smaller business, and sometimes right,
Yeah.
they are still like if you have housemate, do you give her a mobile and they can video? There is also some other issues plus distraction. But
Yeah, no, I think, look, for obviously for companies, there's an approach how to do it. For our families, what I always find is that, especially for children and young adults and so on, keep them busy with things, right? So keep them busy, and as parents, you have to be actively involved. My kids are quite old; they're 22 and 20, so they're at university, finished university, and so on. But I know that I always used to keep them very busy so they're doing their academics, then they're doing some sports, and I'm involved in that as well, right? Because then when the kids are busy doing stuff, they don't have time to spend looking at phones and distractions and whatever else, right? Because it is very tempting. So once you start developing those good habits over time, the children, they won't need to do that. They won't need to go there. And especially when you start and develop some kind of craft, or the children learn to maybe do some painting or learn poetry or learn, woodwork or craft or something with your hands, right? Or you learn how to do horticulture or gardening, whatever it might be, some sport. But I think when you get busy doing things, then you're going to be less distracted, really. So I think that's kind of my advice especially for families and stuff.
that's good.
Very nice. I think Miss Iman Ibrahim has also some questions.
Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum assalam wa
Thank
rahmatullah.
you, Professor Rehan, for the enlightening presentation, and especially for the multitasking, because some of people see it as a positive thing, and they are writing that I am multitasking in the CV and as a strength point, but actually it's not. Yani, as you explained, it's not a strength point. يعني it is a weakness point that we have to focus on task by task. And another enlightening point that you have mentioned about the leader and the action point. And the leader has to take an action also, not only orders and ordering the employee, but he has to do something and take action to lead by model.
Correct.
So it was also additional enlightening idea. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, good. I mean, if you look at multitasking, how did it start? Well, in the 1960s, computer scientists developed a way for a computer to do parallel processing. So computers could do two things at once, right? So this was developed. So then they took that same model of parallel processing within computing and they applied it to human beings, right? So that's where it comes from. Before that, there was no idea. There was no discussion of multitasking.
Yeah, that's why they are seeing as a positive, a strong point for every human being, but it's not actually the real one.
Exactly.
Thank you, Mr. Reyes.
Yes, hi, good evening, Mr. Rehan. Thank you so much for your presentation. It's really very inspiring, and we are living the same, the contents, in the presentation, we are really living it in our daily life. I have a story in the office. I would like to take your opinion. Maybe you can give me a solution.
Okay.
I am a multitask lady at home and in the office. This multitask comes like a routine work that you can do it automatically without thinking. This is here what I mean by multitask. And with this multitask action from my side, I was able to do a lot of work, and I was really appreciated for that. My problem is now our new offices is like stations, like stations, and we have desks, one after the another, in front the other, etc. So I have one colleague who is concentrating while writing letters, for example, or making a report. She comes to me, Therese, Therese, I want to tell you one thing. Busy, one thing. Then when I shout at her, she starts ringing phone. I swear by God, I don't know what to do with her. And even it happened with me 2 days back, and now I'm not talking to her because I said I'm sorry, we are not young. and not nice to go to the director and complain. We are, you know, it's not in a good position to put yourself in such a situation. So I don't know if you have any solution for that. I'm sorry.
So I think no, I understand that it can be very distracting. So I think these are kind of things that, you know, by ourselves, it's very difficult to change the people around us. But at a team level, it could be like during a team meeting, we have a discussion about the topic, not pointing at a finger at a particular individual, but we just say, hey, you know, with regards to minimizing distraction, is there something that we could do in the office? Maybe I've seen one organization, what they did was that they actually had like a lamp on people's desk, and the lamp like had a green bulb. And when you switch the green bulb on, that means do not disturb. Yeah. But it was something that everyone in the team agreed to. So if you try and do it by yourself, it's not going to work. But if you can get a consensus in your team to say, hey, listen, can we just try this, you know, and when this light bulb is on, or when something is there, you know, whatever it might be, that we all agree that that person should not be disturbed. Because then if you've agreed at your management and a team level, then if someone is doing that, you can say, hang on a second, we all agreed this, like, you know, what's going on, right? Maybe you could try that. That might work.
Yes, thank you very much. I will suggest to do it at the DHA level. I'm working in DHA, and I will do it in my office. You are right. Tomorrow I will ask for a meeting under this topic.
Okay.
Focusing. Thank you so much, and I will let you know with the result.
Okay,
Thank you so
great.
much. Thank
Great.
you.
Very good, Mr. Reyes. I hope things will get better in your working environment. I have Dr. Nasreen was raising her hand, but I don't know where is she. Maybe disconnected. We have with us someone named at having some question. So please go ahead, at. You are on mute. You are on mute. We cannot hear you. Are you there? Actually, till she will open her mic, I have some question.
Sure.
A problem defined is half solved. Now we have this fear now of this distraction and scrolling into our life like a big monster, and we cannot stop it, to be honest with you. And maybe I don't know whether something I was thinking this is something related to age, but now I notice some people that are sharp in their focus in their elder age. So now you are telling us there is a hope, and there is like a way that we can get out, or we can like protect ourselves, and we can protect those around us. Is there like a roadmap or course of action, or like something you advise us to take, whether in individual level or on a group level? Like you mentioned in the last slide something quickly. If you please can elaborate on it.
Yeah, I think that the most important thing is get busy doing something. Because if you're not busy doing something, you'll start getting bored, right? Now, I write novels, right? So that's my as an artist, right? So I'm an artist outside of what I do. So I'm busy in my art. I'm reading novels, I'm researching novels, I'm writing novels, I'm speaking to other writers. Okay. So I don't find myself bored, because if I was bored, I would be sitting there probably watching Netflix or something, right? So each of us, I think we have to think about, you know, what is it that you can do outside of your extracurricular activity? Okay. Maybe someone wants to take up cycling. Maybe someone wants to take up, you know, designing geometry, like geometric tile work, right? We can all do things, and you're not going to become like a geometric, you know, tile worker to make like a living, but it's just a way of doing something. Okay. Maybe someone wants to learn the oud, or how to play the oud or something, or someone wants to learn a different instrument. These are things that you should, when you take these things up, you become so, uh, they basically help you becoming distracted by other stuff, right? So my advice, always look at your life, see how much time you have. We all have a lot of time. There was someone once said, they said that, you know, every step you take in life is one step closer to your death, right? And it's true, right? It's like every step you take is one step closer to your death. Now that should make us depressed. It should actually make us more eager and more keen to actually use our time properly. Because then the time I have now, I'm not going to get it back, right? What am I doing with my time? You know, if for example, you know, we got to the end of our life and then someone played a video of your entire life, what did you do? What would we see in our life, in our video? Would we see that we had our phones and we were doing this? Do we really would we feel proud about that, right? Or would it show that actually no, we were doing some charity work or we were doing some something else, something of substance. So I think being critical of yourself and thinking about how am I using my time? Is there barakah in my time, or am I just wasting my time? This is it must start with that self-reflection first of all. And then you'll find that there are things you can do. Before I started writing novels, I was writing film scripts. And I did a couple of film scripts, but then I realized actually writing novels is what I should do. But I wouldn't have got to novels unless I'd written film scripts first. So maybe you start saying, oh, I want to do painting. But when you start doing painting, you realize, actually, I don't want to do painting. But maybe it takes you somewhere else, right? So it's the journey, right? Don't worry about the destination. Worry about the journey, because the journey is what makes you who you're going to become, because you don't know, right? You don't know where your qadr is, right? You have no idea. So, but if you make the effort, then you will end up where you are meant to end up. But don't worry about that now.
So may I ask you, like, you mentioned something about organizations, because I wrote a book about human capital management, and it's caught my attention when you show the Gallup research that employees are not engaged enough, which represent like the return on investment in employment will be less and less and less. And do you find, like, you said also, like, you've been involved and engaged with different organizations to improve their level of focusing and less distraction. Would you please, like, brief us about this experience you had with these organizations?
Yeah. So generally, the kind of organizations I'm working with will be large organizations, or there'll be people like law firms, like lawyers who need to, like, are knowledge workers. And what I find is that for the executives, okay, in these organizations, often they're just like they have just too much going on, and they're trying to do too much, okay, and so they're aiming for quantity, not quality. But it's always quality always wins, right? A quality product, a quality strategy, a quality idea will always shine. It'll always outshine everything else. But people are aiming for quantity. Let me do this, let me do this, let me do this. And then, so at the leadership level, people are distracted at that kind of, they've just got too much information, too much to process. They have a kind of a fear of missing out. Oh, if I don't do this, maybe such and such a thing will happen. No, you have to make a choice. That's why you're an executive. You make a choice. Sometimes you get it right. Sometimes you get it wrong. It's okay. At an employee level, there's a big impact on, like, productivity. Okay, so what I'm finding is that going into organizations, people are perhaps they're not sort of working to their fullest, right? They're kind of like, it's come in, they just do a few hours, they do a few emails, then they just go away. Now, for a lot of those employees, they don't feel very good about their job. Yeah, because they've never got into flow state. There's something called flow state, which I'm sure you've heard of, FLOW. Now, flow state is something that when, like, time and space disappears. So, for example, when I'm writing a novel, I'm like in flow state, I'm really enjoying it, time and space disappears, and I'm really pushing my ability. Now, as most artists will get into flow state, but when I ask people at work, oh, when was the last time you were in flow state? They're like, oh, I'm not sure when. But when I look at my career of 30 years that I worked in the corporate sector, when did what were the most memorable moments at work? When did I really enjoy it? Was when I was in flow. Maybe I was designing a strategy, I was doing an investment case, whatever it was. But when I was in flow, And so when you're in flow, not only are you being more productive, not only are you producing quality, but what's also happening is that the neurochemicals in your brain, serotonin, oxytocin, all these kind of happy neurochemicals are getting fired off when you're in flow. So I think, to answer your question then, so I think at the employee level, it's a productivity issue, but the more you can get into flow state, you can fix it. At an executive level, it's more about, okay, maybe we're trying to do too much, right? We need to be more focused on what we can actually do.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Actually, there is a question by Miss Angelica. I don't know if she can open the mic. She was having difficulty opening her mic. This is at. So she wrote on the chat asking for like a silver bullet. Can you please ask within all your experience, which has been the best tool to improve focus? Is it walnut? Is it some food? Is it some exercise in the morning? Deep breath? Or is it like anything we can do?
I would say the most important thing is your intention,
Intention.
is your niyyah. When you have a good niyyah, when you have a good intention, okay, doors will open up for you. Things that you did not know were going to happen. But if your intention is wrong, okay, then it becomes harder, it becomes darker, it becomes more problematic. So I think the most important, and again, research shows this as well. There's a lot of research out there which talks about implementation intention. This is a very simple, like secular example, if you like, would be if someone could say, yeah, I'm going to go to the gym on Saturday, right? That's an intention. But if I make an implementation intention, I say, okay, I am planning to go to the gym at 9 o'clock on Saturday morning, and I will take out my trainers and my gym clothes, and I will leave it there. And I'm going to train for 45 minutes. I've made an implementation intention. Then there's a higher chance that I'll do it because I've made that intention, right? And I've built a plan around my intention. So I think having the right niyyah, having the right intention, whether it's in a family environment, whether it's in a work environment, when you get that, when you nail that really well, okay. Like again, I'll give an example from my own life. So I wrote 3 books, 3 novels, which were fantasy novels initially. And my intention at the time was, oh, my novels will be really famous and people will read them, and then there'll be a movie and I go on the red carpet. My intention was wrong. Like I had bad intention. Like my intention was to, that it was not right. I then changed my intention. I said, no, my intention is to try and when I write my novels, to remember God myself, but also try and become a better person, have more virtue. Okay. So I changed my intention. My intention was now through my novels, because I write books which have akhlaq, which have tarbiyah. So I want to try and become a better person. Now, as soon as I changed my intention, within a couple of months, I got a publishing contract from a UK publisher. Yeah. And it was my intention that changed, right? And then suddenly doors open up that you never knew that were going to be there. So my advice is intention, intention, intention. Get that right.
Inshallah, get our
That's your
intention.
silver bullet.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. I think Miss Iman also has another
Sure.
Yes, Mr. Rehan, how did you started this passion of writing books? Did you try
When
it
I
out?
was, please.
How did it started? Because also I think all of us, we have a dream also of writing a book and we don't know where to start.
Yeah.
So what do you suggest for us?
Well, first of all, for me, how it started was when I was young in primary school, I used to write, and I had a teacher who would always encourage me to write. But then as I got older, I went to finish school, went to university, and then I kind of forgot about my writing interest. And then I think it was in 2009. So my daughter was 6 at the time, and we were having breakfast. So I was a COO for a company. So I was working as a chief operating officer in a company. And my daughter at breakfast said to me, she said, Abu, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's a very cute thing for a child to say, right? So I was an executive in a company, and she said to me, Abu, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I thought to myself, that's a really good point. I always wanted to be a writer. So then I made the intention that actually what I really want to do, I know it's never going to make me any money, but I want to be a writer. So then I started a parallel track, so I'm working and I start a parallel track, I start writing. Okay. So that was the spark that got me to move in that direction. And sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need someone just to say something to us and say, oh, okay, yeah, that can work. And then how I did it, I think the most important thing for a writer, if you want to write a book, you must have some kind of discipline. You must have the discipline to write. Okay, so for me, that was part of it was actually believing that, no, I am a writer. So when I go out, I do observe the world. I do have a level of listening and hearing and smelling and seeing, and I'm observing things. So I have the habits of a writer. You know, if you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader first. How many books do you read? I wasn't reading enough books. So, now I'm normally reading 3 books at the same time. So I'm reading one fiction, so one like novel. I'm reading one, say, management book, and then I'm reading one like history book, right? For example. So I read 3 books. So in a month, I might finish 7 books in a month, right? So that's a habit. If you want to be a writer, you have to be a reader. And then you have to practice the craft, right? It's a craft. The more you practice, so you need to be writing. So when I'm writing a novel, I'm writing about 1,000 words a day, right? Okay. You have to do that. If you can't do 1,000 words a day, you can't call yourself a writer. You have to think about the kind of the habits that you will have, the rituals that you have. So do you have a particular place that you sit and write every day? That's your ritual. Do you have a time that you say, I'm going to write at this time? So for me, I write normally from 7 a.m. to 8:30. So 7 o'clock to 8:30. That's when I write. Then I have to start my day job, right? Because the day job pays the bills. So I'm writing. Then I have a ritual, like I'll have my cup of tea with me when I'm writing. So again, the more you can minimize the friction around you, the more you can have stability in your writing environment, and also that your family knows as well that, okay, so during this time Rehan is writing, don't disturb him, yeah? So I think these are all things that you can just do to help you. Because when you start thinking I'm a writer, you will start putting the habits of a writer in place as well.
Thank you so much. And that's why we are here. And Mr. Subhi always inspiring us to read. And we are here every week in order to read a chapter or even one page of a book. But
Very
I
good.
have learned additional thing from your daughter, when she said, when she said what you will do when you grow up. So every people they are saying we will grow up, خلاص, we will sit, we don't have anything to do. But we can do something even when we grow up. This is the giving period of our life that we can give the community, give our experience, our thought, whatever we have gone through, we can give our community our experience in this period.
Exactly. Yeah, as long as you have your health, you can always do something. There is no retirement. You don't need to retire. You can always help younger people. You can do some, as you say, in the community. Because then your mind is active, right? When we stop doing something, then people start getting Alzheimer's, dementia, other things start happening when you stop using your brain.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It's very inspiring, and you took us to a new level now. And Dr. Khamis also has something to say.
Yes, indeed. It is an inspiring story of the daughters and how it enlightened you to become a writer. And it's maybe you become our role model because I'm similar to you in the business world, and then now we're starting a company, Dr. Subhi, in this writing book, and I see you are having a diversified, you have a novel which is different way of writing compared to a business like this distraction
Yeah.
book. So how what you went to two words, you know, not focusing and so how you become to select, you know, your writing.
Yeah. So look, this is you know, I've been doing this now for about 2014, so about 10 years, right? So I've been writing for about 10 years, and it is a craft. Okay, so sometimes people struggle writing fiction, writing novels, and then writing non-fiction like business books. Okay, now because I've worked always in the corporate sector, I guess writing non-fiction, writing management books, business books, it's actually quite easy for me because I've always been writing at work as well. And then outside of work, that's been much harder, writing fiction. You know, the first novel I wrote, it was a science fiction story. I wrote it, I think, in 2012 or something. 2012, I think I wrote it. And I thought, oh, wow, amazing, incredible story, science fiction. It's going to be winner all the prizes. I sent it to an editor for review. And then the editor, they did the report, and then they sent me back the report. And they said, and the report starts by saying, Rehan, I would suggest you first sit down before you read the report. Okay. And then he ripped it apart, completely destroyed the novel, red line everywhere, utter rubbish, garbage, trash. Right. So I was like, huh? This is my novel. I worked on it for like 1-2 years. How can you? So initially, you feel like your ego, your nafs, right? Your nafs gets angry. Your nafs lamara gets angry. Oh, what's going on? And then you think, no, actually, no. This is no. He's right. And when I looked at it, he's right. And I thought he is helping me become a better writer. So then I looked at it from a different perspective. And so my attitude about becoming a better novelist is I always want to learn from others, and I want people to tell me what I'm doing wrong. Because I can't see it, right? You can't look at yourself in that way. But if someone else tells you, oh, I see. So if you're willing to be, if you're open for that, then you will always get better, right? So that's why I think for me, the business writing was always easy. It's quite simple. But the novel has taken a long time. And now I just finished another novel just literally 2 months ago, which will be my 7th novel. And alhamdulillah, now I feel like, okay, now I'm got into my stride. Now I can write at a certain international level. I feel it now. And the editors and the publishers who read the most recent book, they're like, wow, this is really good. But it's taken me 12 years, right? But it's just chipping away, slowly, every step. And the best change is when we, if someone wants to become more compassionate or they want to become more kind, then you should spend time with people who are compassionate, who are kind, right? You find sohbah, you find people who have that attribute, and then you become like that as well, right? But if you hang out with people who are selfish, then you'll think, hey, I'm really compassionate compared to that selfish person. But don't look down, look up. Find people who are better than you. So the same thing with writing. If you can try and find people, writers who are better than you, learn from them, right? And never think that I'm a great writer, because the day you think you have arrived, I am number one, that's when the ego kicks in, and then boom. It's better to think I'm on the path, I'm a student, I'm learning. Yeah. And that way, inshallah, when then when you're successful, you won't even, it's not a big deal for you. But other people will say, wow, you changed. Oh, really? I didn't realize.
Thank you so much. I think we have also Dr. Amjad with us. Long time, Dr. Amjad, no see, but I'm so glad to listen to
Thank you
your
very
work.
much. Thank you, Dr. Sophie. Actually, he's my teacher, first of all. Actually, I'd like to give him, I really admire all the things that I learned from him. This is something I have to say to everyone. I have 2 questions for Dr. Rehan. The first one, that I've been stuck with my daughter. She's a good reader, but unfortunately, I couldn't find the right novel for her. So basically, this is something that I really request you to find an attention with a group of people who have to work in our virtues, who have to work in our understanding, how to construct the youngsters' minds in order to be constructive, in order to be really in a different level. We cannot just throw our children or our kids by reading different novels that we don't have the background of the author, or we don't have what's his aim of writing such a books. So basically, this is something, it's a request. Can you guide me, please, in how to handle this? This is the first question. Second one, you have been saying that you have been working with different organizations. How was the impact of your work? Because sometimes we find a gap between what we are trying to implement with our employee or subordinates. I've been working with, for example, I was as a director for more than 40 person, and sometimes I'm a unitask person. I'm not a multitasking at all, and this is something, because even if two people comes to me, I say I can hear one, I cannot hear two. I'm sorry. So basically, this is something. What was the impact of your, work with different organizations? To which extent you can classify yourself as successful in changing their behavior, their attitudes, their understanding, and they're implementing the theories you were talking about, of not distracting themselves and even being very focused. I hope I just conveyed my message.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Dr. Amjad. So basically, with regards to the first question, now a lot of parents are obviously very concerned about what their children are reading, because so like in 2022, I think I visited 20 schools, right, around the world. I went to 20 different schools, and a lot of the schools I went to were just secular schools. A lot of schools were Christian schools, right? And a lot of schools were Muslim schools. And when I went to the Christian school and I went to the Muslim school, they both had the same concern. They're worried about what the children are reading and some of the stuff that's being, pushed by various, organizations. And so I think if you do a search, you will find there are parents groups, certainly the Christian parents groups, and there are Muslim parents groups who basically do have book recommendations. And my kids aren't that young anymore, so I don't know what the latest ones are. But I'm sure if you go on there and search, I know there's like certain mothers groups, the Muslim mothers groups, who've been coming up with a list of books for different age groups, for children to read, that parents would be comfortable with. So I know certain resources are there. If you're worried about a particular book, then maybe it's worth obviously you reading it first yourself as well and seeing if you're comfortable with your kids. As the children get older, when they get to 12, they get to 13, it's very likely that they won't listen to what you want them to read, right? They'll be doing their own thing now, because their friends will recommend something, they'll do something else. So then if you're worried about, okay, what's my child reading? Then, and you're not comfortable with what they're reading, you read that book as well and have a discussion. Have a discussion with them and say, hey, in the book, I thought, and see what they think. And generally, inshallah, when the children have their fitra is generally good, right? They have good fitra, their hearts are clean. They'll know when something is wrong. But if you can be available for them to have that open discussion with you, and then you can say, well, yeah, okay, maybe the writer wrote about this, but that's not our culture. We don't believe in that, right? I think it's important to have that transparent conversation. I've always did that with my kids as well. If there were some books like that, then yeah.
It happens once actually, and once I've overlooked it in a book, I requested my daughter to quit it because the things inside, and she was telling me that don't worry, I'm not going to be influenced with these ideas. I said nobody is not going to be influenced with any ideas. They are there to be influenced by, to be manipulating the mind for something they are willing to shift your mind to. So basically, no, stop it, please. And I told her, okay, I'll offer you a compensation for this book. Just quit it because it's not the right book for you. But in the first place, at least I should have some sort of, say guidance, where you say that there's some groups they can give us what could be. Because if you keep telling them, write about the history of Rasulullah, write about the Sahaba, sometimes they'll feel bored, actually. They feel, can't you give us something else to read instead of just, forcing these books on us? I think you understand what I'm saying. Am I correct?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I know it's certainly for the younger children, there's definitely more variety. for young adults, for 12, 13, 14, like, my books are for that age group. So I know that a lot of parents come and say, hey, what else is there? There are people who are writing things, but there's not enough. I mean, there's not enough which is good quality, really, to read. Okay. Just mindful of the time as well, Dr. So, because I do need to finish in a few minutes. And so to answer your other question with regards to the impact on organizations, so I think the main impact I've seen is that the quality of the work, okay, has changed. That's where I've seen it. So when people can focus on what they need to do, the quality goes up, right? Whatever the deliverable is, right? And then the second thing is where I've seen some impact is that people are not working such long hours, right? I can tell you, I worked for 30 years in the corporate sector, and the number of times I worked on a weekend is less than the number of fingers you see. So in 30 years, I worked less than 10 times on a weekend throughout my entire career. I didn't need to. I just got my stuff done because I was very focused. I went in there very much. So I think, to me, one is, if the quality of the work deliverable goes up, whatever that might be, and if the time spent, people get the work done when they're meant to get the work done by, and they can go home, that to me is kind of like a proof of, okay, this is working.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rehan, for being with us. We promised for 45 minutes, but you gave us 90 minutes, and we'll never get enough from your wisdom, from your knowledge. I hope like everybody will read with me this book, and we can, after that, also ask Mr. Rehan to discuss any idea, anything you are learning from here. A lot of impact, a lot of things that we can adopt and we can learn and we can pass to our people around us. Thank you all.
Inshallah. Inshallah. And if there's anyone who wants to, know a bit more about for their organization that they're working in, please contact Dr. Sobi, and inshallah we can see if we can, do something for you as well.
Inshallah, I'll be there. And anybody wants to have any question about how to pass this knowledge to your organizations, we can coordinate it together. And also I shared with the chat the mobile number and the website and the link for buying the book for Mr. Rehan, with your permission, Mr. Rehan. And thank you so much, guys. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for your input. Thank you for wonderful questions. And
thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, Prof. Rehan.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And by the way, this meeting is transmitted to YouTube, live stream to YouTube, and it's available there if anybody wants to go again to it, because we need to write. I wrote so many notes and still so much to write again. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful night.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Shukran, masalam. Shukran.
Bye bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so